Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Education Transformation 2020 presentation, Shift in Campus Culture. My name is Joanna Graber, and I am a member of the Training and Support team here at Hawks Learning. Our speaker today is Professor Sanjay Paul. Professor Paul is an assistant professor at Southside, Virginia Community College. He has been an educator for 22 years, beginning his career teaching English as a foreign and second language, and later shifting to subjects including sociology, psychology, and counseling. He recently earned his MA in Organizational Leadership through Waldorf University and is currently pursuing a DSL through Southeastern University. He also holds an MS in Sociology from New Mexico State University, a Master's in Psychology and Graduate Certificate in Conflict Resolution from Golden Gate University, and a BS in Sociology from Indiana University, Bloomington. Having studied and traveled in numerous countries, these experiences combined with his educational experiences have greatly informed his approach to pedagogy, social community, and health and wellness. We are so excited that Professor Paul is here to share his experience and insight with us today. Kate Lawson of Hawks is also joining us in the background of the webinar today. She is here to help answer questions throughout the webinar, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. So please enter those in the Q&A as we go. So if we get some questions throughout, Professor Paul may jump in and answer those throughout. Otherwise, we will address some of them towards the end as well. Now note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent to all attendees when the video is processed and ready for distribution. And on that note, I will hand it over to you, Professor Paul.
Well, thank you, Joanna, for that wonderful introduction. I can call you Joanna, or how would you prefer to be addressed?
Joanna's perfect.
All right, and I'm Sanjay, everybody. So thank you so much, and Kate, thank you again as well. So today, Hawks wants to discuss the shift in campus culture. And I would actually like it if Joanna and Kate would participate in this discussion as we move through it, because Hawks is on the cutting edge of many exciting aspects around this change. So the first thing we know, and there's no getting around this, there is this pandemic that has created a shift in campus culture and learning. And in which ways have you noticed that? So Joanna and Kate, what are your thoughts? Because I noticed when I was teaching live and I was driving to Charlottesville here in Virginia, and Joanna, I don't know where you're based out of. Are you in South Carolina?
I'm actually up in Boston.
Oh, wow, I love Boston. I actually studied at Boston University in high school for a summer camp, film camp.
Okay.
What did you think when the pandemic hit? I mean, because it started last year in China and then it spread. What I noticed is all of our classes moved from face-to-face, and I was already doing online and Zoom classes, but they were shifting all to Zoom and then online only. What did you notice in Boston?
That is actually exactly what I noticed as well. I work with quite a few schools in the New England area, as well as some schools in Texas. And across the board, there was a large shift to fully online classes, a lot of use of Zoom. We were working with specifically a lot of instructors who were needing assistance in figuring out how to take their course from being an on-the-ground in-person class with maybe a mix of online and in-person assignments to fully online. So that's what I really encountered a lot of, was the complete shift online in terms of work for the students, grading, and even just student engagement really moving to the online platform.
Very interesting. So Joanna, what about Kate? How has her experience been?
So Kate's position is a little bit different. So I've worked with our customers most directly, so I can really speak best to a lot of that here.
Got it. All right, perfect. So the learning has shifted in the way that you've described in terms of the shift to Zoom and online, and how are campuses doing things differently? And I know that Joanna, you talk to a lot of campuses, people at a lot of campuses, a lot of professors and administrators. What do you notice that they're doing differently beyond what you said?
Right. So I noticed that one of the things that instructors are really focused on most is finding those ways to engage students online and to hold their attention and to transition their lecture style courses, especially online. So I know a lot of instructors who have created their own lecture videos to supplement, our videos and our resources. I think that a lot of kind of social experiences have also been moved online. I know that a lot of some instructors who were previously using discussion boards kind of took that to the Zoom classroom to try to give more of that personal engagement opportunity. But yeah, in addition to that, really just what I said before in terms of, moving all those assignments online.
All right, very good. One of the things that I've noticed is I've noticed that it is a brave new world in the sense that during this pandemic, there have been many projects that were halted, reformed, or which have continued with only slight modifications. And many projects may undergo risks and failures due to the move. We've actually seen cases around the country where people have lost um, the desire to go to Zoom, and some people need a little more handholding. So what I've noticed is a lot of students need a lot of one-on-one support. And one of the things that an institution did in Ohio that I worked with is we decided there to eliminate certain assignments based on the student's situation without eliminating the standards. And what we're doing at Southside, I've seen it at other schools like Ultimate Medical Academy and other places, very flexible in terms of allowing the students, and I'm sure it's like that at other institutions, this idea of wanting the students to be successful, wanting the students to have the flexibility, because what I'm running into is students losing loved ones due to the pandemic. I had a student from a year ago. I met with her yesterday. She says, Professor Paul, I loved your psychology class. And I said, how are you doing? What's going on? She said, well, I lost my father-in-law. I lost my father-in-law earlier in the summer. And it's almost like this loss, the health and wellness checks, the testing is an added extra to our new lifestyle that nobody was talking about this before. And when you lost somebody, it was like, oh my goodness. And so what has happened is that has created a sense of burnout on the back end. So there are a lot of classes and projects which have been transformed as a result to offset that burnout. And we'll get into that later on in the presentation about the anxiety and ways to deal with it, depression and things like that. The uniqueness, novelty, and transience of the work of the project can create risk. So that risk needs to be managed. So and a really good book I have in the reference section is by Turner, and it helps to manage the organizational change in the face of various educational environments. So the thing we have to realize is we have to be part of the change. I have seen at certain schools, certain professors are not on board. They're very skilled at their style. They've been teaching much longer than I have. I've been teaching 22 years. But there have been people I've run into 40 years, 45. So you got to pay attention, right? Then we got these professors coming up 2 or 3 years. They've been teaching. So the challenge is, my attitude is all hands on deck. Okay? All hands on deck, whatever is needed. And then the other thing that I've noticed is this idea of, as we're creating shells, we should give those shells over to the adjuncts. If you're full-time a professor anywhere, you have to help the faculty, not just the students. What you said about the digital tools, and we'll get into that, and the platforms and everything like that, we don't want adjuncts reinventing the wheel, because sometimes they're brought in last second. I can tell you during the pandemic earlier, we had some shifts here at the college. I had already been designing some courses. It ended up being that I needed to pick up another course. There was an administrator that took one of the courses I designed. They forgot, for example, that I had designed that course. I reminded my supervisor. She let that person know, and they were very appreciative because it gave her a track to run on. There's another course that I'm teaching this term. We have somebody getting ready to teach it next term, and absolutely take my shell. We're making some modifications to it and personalize it. We have to help each other. It's all hands on deck, because as you're moving into the risky territory, that sense of predictability and control creates that sense of safety. What are your thoughts, Joanna? What do you think?
I think that is so spot on. There are some different factors that I think were not, taken into account with how this would affect people, and, on a personal level as well as, on a professional level. And I think what you just said about adjuncts is particularly powerful, because we, a lot of time these are the instructors who this isn't their full-time role, and, things with their full-time job could have become significantly more challenging. And so now they have a little bit less time to dedicate to this. So really supporting them and finding ways to make sure that they're comfortable and confident. And especially if there are already existing, you know, course shells and tools to help them out, I think sharing those is really, you know, we've learned a lot about community and the importance of community during this time.
Yes, and Joanna, I want to share something with you. Speaking of what you said about community, guess what I'm holding in my hand?
What is that?
This is correspondence from the prison students.
Oh,
Southside
wow.
Virginia has a wonderful program led by Miss Lisa Hudson called Campus Within Walls.
Mhm.
And we have a program where we teach prisoners. And so what
Wow.
we do is we work with them weekly and we grade their work, send it back. I'm creating some motivational clips for the psychology course, because imagine being in prison during the pandemic. You have the specialized population. So you got the general students, we've covered the faculty, the
Right.
staff, but now you got these specialized populations that are needing that extra encouragement, and
Right.
they're behind bars. So I think a lot of us do the community outreach, but that requires special attention. So I'm going to create some videos this week, and they're going to play them in the prisons, and then they're on lockdown, but when they're free, they get to watch the video. So they're looking for that face-to-face connection. It becomes even more important during this period. What do you think?
Right. Right. I definitely would agree. That's great that you all do that.
Yes. And it's wonderful to see their goals and to see how you can help to be that catalyst of change. The other thing is, as you were talking about earlier, I like digital tools. And the thing is, a lot of professors are using open source materials. But I like the fact that Hawks partnered with Rice University, according to one of your coworkers, Corey Eno, who's amazing as well, just as amazing as you and Kate. And um, there is this idea of updating the curriculum constantly. And I see sometimes publishers don't do that. And I like that Hawks is doing that, trying to stay cutting edge. And they bring in a design team. And it's very interesting because, as an example, I worked on, as you know, many chapters for you in the sociology department, as many other people have. We had the Trayvon Martin tragedy in 2011. Well, guess what? 2020, we got a whole plethora of new cases. And so we updated everything and updated the photos, images, charts, added research, and it has to be organic. Yeah, and the thing is, you need it to be open access, and depending on whether you have rural students, and I know that, I don't know if Kate is in South Carolina, I know Corino is. I know Danny Shapiro is one of the workers here as well, one of the heads. So I'm in Virginia, and we have students in rural areas, and I sat down with my supervisor here, and we talked about it because I put all the bells and whistles, right? I put all the interviews, video vignettes, and everything like that. But what you have is people using hotspots to log in, sometimes just their phone. And it really is becoming about this plug and play during the pandemic, this idea of, I need the interaction, but I can't go crazy with the bandwidth. And then forget about a McDonald's. I don't even see one McDonald's here. Maybe I think there's one about 20 miles from here. And the idea is like, good luck. You have to find some place with Wi-Fi. You know, the school has it. Everything's fine here. But some people really need a stable connection. And then also, I've seen a lot of publishers drive up the costs. Well, we want you to change the code frequently. Sometimes they have the universal code. And sometimes I've seen students get disinterested. It gets too confusing for them because you have all the bells and whistles. So what I think is going to happen as and then you may or may not agree with this idea of the accessibility is going to be number one, and then cost number two, and then this idea of, do I have the support? Can I just, is it clear that I know what I need to do, and do I have the support, and can I just do it? And so I've noticed that there's something called the complexity factor, and you might have heard of this, right? For every step that you add to a process, what it does is it complicates things, because I have absolutely no idea what to do now because it just keeps getting more complicated, and it increases by the square. Every step you add to a process you get a student to do, it can drive up, like, for example, for 2 steps squared, that's 4 times more complicated. If you add another one, it's 3 squared, 9. We got 9 times more complicated. and it creates more confusion. So the challenge that today's professors are going to have, and you notice this, and this is what I love about Hawks, is it's very clean and streamlined. Corey Eno had me work on these summary charts, these knowledge checks. And as you know, you're very visual and you appeal to different learners, and there's the interactions. I've seen some publishers do drag and drops. And so we need that interaction, we need the visual, and then I also recommend this idea of, we know Zoom is here to stay, and we'll get back to Zoom in just a moment, but I recommend QuickTime Player. I love QuickTime Player. Now, you don't have to like QuickTime Player, but Joanna, have you used QuickTime Player?
I actually have not.
So what it is QuickTime Player is an effective tool where you have audio threads and you can weave a large number of threads. I was helping a professor at Louisiana State University. I help once a year. And we have 120 students. Can you imagine that, Joanna? And so what I do is they have something called a media gallery in the Blackboard shell. So what I do is I read through, and we read through, I go through everything. I have resources, I create audio clips, I customize them, I store them there, go back to the students, and then I link them. So I try to use the audio, I try to use the visual, and I try to use the kinesthetic. Now, what I also suggest is that professors, and I'm sure they already know this, and Joanna, you might notice, you should have a notebook or a notepad for the course or a teacher's planner. Because I had one student 2 months ago, and I'm still, I could be teaching for 22 years. I might have a lot of experience, but it's like I'm wet around the ears. Because every time I teach a class, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm learning something new. And I'm open to it. And I had a student that says, hey, look, I really like your class. And I see that you're engaging everyone with the audio clips and you're very energetic. However, it's not working for me. And he said that it's not working for me. Here's what I want. And he told me I want everything written out. I said, you got it. So I remembered his name. And anytime I logged into the course, I looked for his name first. I added extra resources, but I typed out everything. I made sure not to include an audio for his post. And even in the written feedback, it's, how we have scaffolded feedback. And in this pandemic, and you might agree, Joanna, we really have to take that feedback from level 1 to level 2, level 3, week 1, week 2, week 3, because they need the extra challenge. They can get bored easily in this environment. And so what was very interesting is he said, what he did 2 weeks later, we were getting closer to the teacher's evaluation and course evaluations. He said, I really appreciated that you made the changes. You listened to me. So what I noticed is if you personalize the class in the way that each student wants, while you're maintaining the consistency and the quality, it pays huge dividends because the student might take another course with you, or they'll feel connected. You know the saying in education, Joanna, I'm sure you've heard of it, this idea, and Kate, you might have heard it too, that students don't care what you know unless they know you care. There's a saying, very popular saying, right? And professors know this. So you got to tap into that emotional connection. Do I care about what you're saying? I've known situations where certain professors are not, let me show you this, and we'll get back to all of this right here. The flexibility of the educational policies, right? Needing to be flexible. Some professors don't bend. They act like there's no pandemic. I'm not here to judge anybody because we have to make sure the quality is consistent. Anybody will tell you, any institution. I've known cases where a professor there was a student that worked on a paper, turned it in 10 minutes late, the professor took off 10%. And the reason the paper was 10% off, they took off 10 points for being 10 minutes late, or it was because they had worked on it before the deadline, they put in extra resources, extra time and attention, and they get penalized for it. I don't know about you, Joanna, but I'm more like, I'm going to do whatever it takes for that student. Now, if there's a valid reason, I can do something. Recently, I had a student at an institution where he was falling behind. We set up a lot of plans. I got him with the advisor. I did everything, and he didn't make the changes. So now he's getting close to the end of the course, and he wants everything reopened. And I said, I'm not going to reopen them. I said, because throughout the course I've been working with you, I said, what I am going to do is allow you to make up the work. And we put a success plan together. I said, but one thing I notice is during the Zoom sessions, you know what he's doing, Joanna? He's driving to another state. During the classes, he's driving. I said, one thing that concerns me is you're driving to another state during our Zoom session, And we need to make sure that you're paying attention. So guess what he did at the last session? He was in front of the computer. And he said, I got a desk. He bought a desk, Joanna. And now he's taking it seriously. I said, I need to know if you want me to work with you. I've worked with you throughout the course. I'm still here for you, but you have to meet me halfway. You've got to come towards me and make it happen. Because what I've seen, it's almost like the kid who calls wolf or something cries wolf, right? That I need help, I need help, I need help. Okay, great. Now, what are you going to do to back that up? So there's the little bit of hand holding. You got to create that team approach, but I also need you to come forward because there's a limit. We have an institution right now where there actually is a student. She turned in an assignment. She says she turned it in, but it is not in, and the course closed. It's over. But we have a special policy at that institution where they allow for adjustments. And we're working with the advisor. I worked with the director, actually spoke to him earlier this morning. And we're going to try to get that student caught up because you want to err with the side of caution and you want to benefit the student. My attitude is because you know this, right? We got to be learner centered, especially during the pandemic. There's a shift in this culture. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to drag them away. You want to be patient. You can show them the consequences. This is the consequence, but we're here to work with you. And what I love is like that student I told you who's driving every time we have session. I said, first of all, don't even look down at your phone. If you're pulling up the Zoom session, I don't want to get in trouble for anything. And he really said, I really love your class and everything. And I said, I appreciate it. I just need these actions. And then I ask him, and I think this is very important, Joanna, even if the professor is not the professor on record for other classes, I still think it helps to check in or tie in or get notes to hand over to the advisor and other professors. And that's another step. It's just that extra little touch. What are your thoughts, Joanna? Because it creates that sense, hey, I heard, you might want to be aware of this. If they allow you to and create like a little system, because it's almost like a catcher's net that I can take that student. I know that what I'm working on here can help the student over here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is so important. I think being a little bit more flexible. I've seen a lot of instructors who are, amending their late penalty or are dropping a test or other things like that, working with a lot of schools in areas that have been affected by hurricanes on top of the pandemic. I know that there is that need for being a little bit more understanding. And like you said, that's not every professor's perspective. Some are very rigid in their, rules and policies, but I do agree that there are a lot of factors that students are not normally dealing with that are going on right now, and being a little sensitive to that in terms of helping them learn the best way possible they can right now, in terms of giving them that little bit of extra flexibility, I think really goes a long way in helping better engage the student and help them stay dedicated to your class and stay involved. So I definitely think those are great steps that I've seen several of my instructors taking as well.
That's wonderful, Joanna. Another thing that I've noticed is when I teach dual enrollment students, we try to get the parents involved, whether here at Southside or at another institution. And if they're a minor and they ever have any questions, I'll be like, call from your parents' phone. I would like them to be aware. And then another thing that it does is it creates a back-end support. Because and I had a student, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, his mother allowed him to call from her phone. And then I was able to talk without violating FERPA, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about success strategies and creating a study schedule and how he's doing well in the course. Any excuse he can find to create that support group that everybody's on board. I see a lot of the most successful students getting that support from their family and friends, and everybody's on board that they're achieving this goal. And they can also teach other people. And there's something called The Total Quality Classroom by William Glasser. I know his work is a little older, but I presented at a conference with a professor named Dr. Jeffrey Leftak-Moreau at the Ohio Association of Developmental Education. It was about 10 years ago, and we trained faculty and staff and this is way before the pandemic, right? And we talked about this idea of the multisensory classroom and the fact that what you teach, right? If you get students to teach each other, they retain more by 90% more. So how does that translate 10 years later into where we are now with the pandemic, one of the things that I see a lot of professors doing is something I do, and you might do this too, Joanna, this idea of breakout rooms. So we also recommend what are called total physical response activities. When I studied to be a teacher at, I taught English at first, the ESL and EFL. I studied in Spain. I studied at the University of Cambridge. They had a branch affiliate, and boy, that British system is tough. They put us through the ringer. I'm not kidding you. And one of the things that they told us, and I studied, was this idea of I worked 14 hours a day on my lesson plans. I could not believe it. And the thing is, they had total physical response activities, and I studied this. As you design a class, even if it's face to face, right? What you want to do, and you know this from your training and development, you want to go to where it's more cognitively taxing to where it eventually drops off. And if the student is getting tired, then you get them to move around and offset that loss of energy by the movement. What are your thoughts on that? So you want the kinesthetic throughout, but especially at the end, and there's this mingling, and it gets a little easier from the cognitive taxation in the beginning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's not something that I actually am familiar with, but that is a very interesting concept. I think holding the student's attention, especially in that way, makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's something that a lot of instructors are likely struggling with via Zoom or other online platforms right now, is how to engage on that extra level there.
Yes. So what I did is, for example, I had the FBI come here, and my students loved her when she came. She talked about her time there. I just decided, I've always wanted to have somebody from the FBI over here. And then what I did is I created a criminal profiling unit. If I told you, Joanna, that we couldn't get enough of it, like the students couldn't get enough of it, I would be lying, because what you almost want to do is you want to create that fun element. There's 4 ways to accelerate learning. And these are the same ways that kids learn, right? We found out at the University of Cambridge. They found out that it's lots of time. You got to give people a lot of time. So if you're going to have assignments, you can have a little extra time. It reduces stress, right? Lots of time. So that gets to number 2, low stress. Number 3 is meaningful context. I have to understand what the message is. What do you want me to understand? Because if I don't know what you're talking about, I'll get shut off, which is why I personally believe there needs to be high interaction. I know a lot of presenters don't agree, but you got to get that check where somebody's checking in, and then you can get the pulse of the class or group or training session, and then you can field the question, address it, and then move forward. Because otherwise, it'll be 30 minutes later. Now you get the question, well, I already figured it out on my own, or that could have helped you to clarify some intention. So meaningful context. And then the 4th thing is survival. I added that for my research based on what I was studying over there. And I realized it has to be survival. In other words, there is latent learning, right? The gradual learning every day, I'm learning something new, but there has to be the survival. I need this as a skill set. And as a matter of fact, what the research shows in psychology is that we tend to learn in 2 primary situations: a crisis situation. It's not the best way to learn, but we learn in that situation. And then we have a humorous situation. We tend to learn during the humorous situations, right? So we tend to learn when classes are fun, easygoing, and we also learn if there's a crisis, right? If I told you you have this due by tomorrow, the cramming will help you to learn. But according to Dave Ellis in his book, Becoming a Master Student, I absolutely love this book. I taught out of it for many years in professional development courses. He talks about how cramming is only good for the short term. I often tell the students, especially with the pandemic, put aside that extra time, and studying for a final exam should be like studying for a quiz if you're doing it each day. What's your take on that? In your training and development sessions, how do you get that across?
So that's something we don't touch on as much on our end, but what I have seen with instructors is that they do often feel similarly to that, is that if there is that gradual buildup of information, it is much easier, come test time. And so, that's why, especially with our course where we do provide all of those, checkpoints throughout, even in our learn screens, as in that sociology product that you're helping with, there are those different checkpoints and engagement opportunities throughout to have them really focusing on learning and retaining things as they go versus this night before cramming kind of thing. So a lot of the instructors I work with say that type of thing exactly, is that if there's a gradual buildup of information, it's a lot less stressful and more productive in terms of retaining that information.
Wonderful, Joanna. See, and one thing I've noticed too with you mentioned the length of the class and keeping people engaged. We know from cognitive psychology, there's something called the primacy effect and the recency effect. It's almost the same for job interviews. If you ever have an interview, you want to either be the first or the last. You don't want to be caught up in the middle where they forget about you. Not saying that that would happen, but you want to be at the beginning or at the end. In the same way, a lesson needs to have a lot of stops and starts. What do I mean? If we have a 1 hour session, we want to ideally change it up a little bit every 10 minutes or so, and you have a video, maybe you have a lead-in attention getter, and you want to make it seamless, an article. And I use what is known as the thematic based approach or the situational approach, right? And I love a lot of topics tied in and developing to each other. So a lesson on abnormal psychology can lead into the criminal profiling. And so you get them from a PowerPoint, and we did an FBI profiling unit. Oh my goodness, it was so exciting because what you do is you keep them hanging on for more. And then they realize, a lot of the students realize that their profile was wrong. And then they paused a second, and then the FBI profilers, we continued the clip, and they explained how they created their analysis. So what that also leads us to, and it's kind of something you hit on, Joanna, this idea of choice theory. There's a really good book I recommend that listeners check this out. It's called The Paradox of Choice, also from cognitive psychology and social psychology, is this idea that the fewer choices that we have, the more motivated we are. If you give me tons of alternatives, right, I'll shut down because I won't know. It's like a kid in a candy store. I don't know what to do, but we tend to go towards what we feel comfortable with. So if students are going to be challenged by professors, they want to introduce the digital tools or other tools gradually. You don't want to overwhelm people with everything at once and like a shotgun approach, because that could be the temptation, especially for new professors. The other thing I recommend also is, especially during the pandemic, like a weekly quiz or check-in. I see a lot of institutions doing this. How's it going? Or, just this kind of let me know early on, because sometimes you find out way too late. Here at the school, we had a situation where a student needed to catch up on 3 of her classes. Definitely willing to do it. She's in 3 of my classes. However, my supervisor and I are also discussing, if she wants to, we can allow her a way to continue next term. So in other words, you give her that choice. So I'm going to work with her regardless over the next month. If you want to do this, if you're committed, but if you're not able to, or if you don't feel comfortable, we're going to allow you this option. So normally, if somebody gives you an either or option, it's like in a sales type of situation, right? They're forcing you either this or this. And the salespeople are trained to get you to say yes, yes, yes. In an academic situation like this, you're giving that student another choice. Like you're saying, if you want to go forward with this, we're going to work with you. It will make it work. If you don't want to, if you feel more comfortable, we'll allow you this. And I think that extra way of, we're going to work with you in the classroom and we're going to work with you outside of the classroom so you're successful. That helps them to stay focused in, and then they also know they're covered out. What's your take on that, Joanna?
Yeah, I think really recognizing the more personal perspective of teaching and that more human relation there, rather than just, this is a student, I present my information and they take it and they learn. Kind of going deeper than that, especially given the current circumstances, I think goes such a long way with students in terms of them feeling supported in more ways than usual. I think that, as you're saying, there are other factors to be paying attention to right now outside of just academics. There's more to academics right now than just learning the material and taking tests. So I think that is such an important thing that you all are doing. And I really support that and think that's so important right now.
And I love it too, Joanna, because I think that another thing that I've noticed that I do is I try to help the students to be successful in terms of letters of recommendation whenever allowed, and we try to be resources for them. So I have a student at another institution. She's living paycheck to paycheck. We're not going to replace any outside advice at that university from a financial advisor. But I did tell her, I said, you're on the right track. She told me some of the things that she's doing. Well, she's saying, professor, you're talking about saving and investing and you're going over the material, but how do I do it when I see this in my reality? And then meanwhile, in that same session, we have another person who's buying and selling apartment buildings. And so I said, let's get everybody on the same page. I said, you want to network with her possibly, because that mentality is infectious. What I try to teach the students is this idea of using professors as resources, learning outside of the classroom, knowing you can get to that next level outside of school. I just had a call with the director at Ultimate Medical Academy today, and we talked about this. He's very motivational, and we have a great team there as well. And he talked about this idea of, he agrees that it's about who the student becomes and not just the educational attainment of the goal, right? And there's a book that I recommend along the lines, and he talks about this too, is the book is called, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called Atomic Habits. Oh, it's a really good book. And the author says it's about who you're becoming. And so this idea of the seamless approach, we're in the pandemic, right? In the same way that we're going between online to hybrid to face, the student should feel as if they're transitioning between those different environments, that they can take the instructor along with him or her. That, you know what, you're a resource in the classroom and you're a resource outside of the classroom. It helps with that seamless approach. I have a professor that I've been keeping in touch with for 20 years. I've known him from Golden Gate University. I've flown to California, attended his communication shops. Do you know, Joanna, he still sends me ebooks. He still sends me recordings. I'll run situations by him. I used to do that in my early days, right, of teaching. Now I kind of know, I'll kind of figure things out too, but I'm not afraid to ask. I'll just ask him what his thoughts are. And it's amazing to see what he's done. And but he's taught me this idea of being totally selfless. I see it here at Southside. I see it at UMA, many other schools that I've participated with, and Louisiana State and all these through instructional connections. And I see this selfless idea of going beyond the minimum. And I truly think the best professors across the country and the world, not that there's anyone better than anybody else, but the one thing that I've noticed separates them is they're willing to really be infectious about what they teach inside the classroom and outside the classroom. They want the student to be hooked on the learning and the theory and the practice. And it's also this obsession with the lifelong learning. They're willing to instill that value set, and you can take it and go with it to another level. And I've seen some of the best professors. I know the ones that we could all be impacted differently by other professors, but I've seen the ones that are so obsessed with what they're teaching that it catches on to the students. What have you noticed, Joanna?
Yeah, I think that is one of the ways to be most effective. And I think just watching you here speak now, you have that infectious energy, you have that desire to engage. So I think that really speaks to students, that holds their attention. And, as you were saying before, kind of this deeper engagement with students, ultimately the goal is not just to learn this lesson and move on. It's to take these concepts, especially in subjects like this, and really take those into their future lives and careers. And so I think that keeping that bigger picture in mind when you're working with these students must be so effective for them. So I think definitely, that kind of progression there from, just being this in the classroom teacher to really focusing on a lot of different aspects of the student as a whole and helping build them up and prepare them for their future, I think can only lead to great things for the students.
Oh, it's so much fun. And you know what I also noticed, Joanna, related to that is this idea too of the mental health considerations. Okay. So there is this idea that whether it's finally getting emotional or mental rest, or spending time with the loved ones, spending time in quarantine, engaging in social distance, getting exercise, or working even long hours. We all have things to be doing. And during these Corona times, we have to take care of ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. What I tell my counseling students is, so I try to tell them, look, when you're going into counseling, you need to keep taking care of yourself regularly. We talk about that. The deeper you go in within yourself, then the more effective you can be with others. I would encourage professors, staff, and students to do the same. One of the things we were doing in one of the other classes is, you know how a lot of people talk about goal settings, working on yourself, resilient mindsets. That's fine, but we also have to work on character flaws and defects. I ran across someone, Joanna, from the Department of Defense a month or two ago at T-Mobile, and she's connecting me with someone. And I think starting in 2021, I'm going to put together a diversity training program and also other training for the Department of Defense through her connection. And then I'm also going to hand it over to the FBI. There's certain things that I'm already studying in the faculty training programs that we do and you do, but I'm also studying federal law enforcement training programs. And I'm seeing why is it that some people are more effective in certain organizations than others. And I see some implications here that you can pass a stringent security clearance background check and still have issues. So I know that there's some institutional factors, right? But I also know that there's also one-on-one factors that we bring into the organization, the educational institution. So I'm very excited about that. So that's coming up next year. In the earlier part of the year, I'm already doing research on that. And because I'm shocked, like you're getting to that high level, right? And have you noticed that in the training and development that you could be a faculty, staff, students, federal employee or something, but something slips if your mental health, your emotional aspect or your physical or your spiritual aspect is out of alignment, and spiritual if applicable. If any of these areas are out of alignment, it can impact you in the classroom. It can impact you outside of the classroom. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think that with the pandemic and everything going on, everyone is under a lot more stress than usual in different ways. And I think that you do see, on a personal level, on a professional level, there are areas where if you're not, feeling fully healthy mentally or taking that time to think about yourself and your mental health, that can have side effects that seep into other parts of your life, even unintentionally. So I think giving that time to really focus on that part of your health is really important because, like you said, especially when you are engaging students and you are, getting to know students on this deeper level and working with them, having a better sense of those other aspects that may be bothering them. They may not be able to focus in class because they're really under a lot of stress due to another factor in their life. And that's why they're not doing so well, or that's why they failed that quiz. And getting to the heart of that rather than writing them off as a bad student, I think is so important.
I love it, Joanna. That's absolutely something that I feel is key. And what you're hitting on is the idea of state-dependent learning. And this idea that if we learn in one context and we try to capture it, right, that they're very positive and upbeat, if we can relive that experience. One of the best ways that I found by reliving that experience is tying in their majors. I have a student who's a sheriff, or he's wanting to be a sheriff. It runs in his family. His dad is a sheriff. It's a psychology class. So I have a lot of law enforcement training. When we did the FBI criminal profiling unit, his eyes lit up and I said, here's how you can bring it down to a state level. And the direct application and customizing or tailoring your teaching to the class at large. I have dental hygiene. I try to smile at those students or something. I got my teeth whitened. I might just quickly relate something to that. But on a serious note, I try to bring in what they're interested in and customize the class. There's a saying that whatever you teach should not be the same as the next day. I go into each class as if I've never taught it before. I know that I have, but it's like a very fresh, organic kind of class. You know what I'm saying? Have you noticed that in your training and development sessions as well?
Yeah, I think there is an increased need for, mixing it up in something different and, treating each session as something new. I think there is a lot of, there are a lot of new experiences right now just because of the different situations we're being thrown into. But I do see, that's most effective really is when you have something different each day and, a different outlook or a different presentation or a different method of presentation.
That's wonderful, Joanna. And one of the things that I found too is during the pandemic, I've been doing research in my doctoral program and also the master's program that I'm finishing up this term. And what I found is, especially for transformational leadership, right, where you're on board with the mission, vision, and values, and you're leading by that inspired vision. And it's not to say that any other type of leadership is not important, but what they found is a lot of employers are trying to prove their worth and they get burned out trying to prove it. and they're worried, especially now we can say with the pandemic, although there's not a lot of literature about it, I guess that people are worried about job loss. And so they overwork. And there, I have some articles here if you want to look, and later on, maybe they can, whoever the participants or anyone looking at them. The idea is that they can burn out because they're worried about their job safety. So there's an added layer of stress, as you know. I recently read another figure where there's 15 million job losses. I read earlier in the summer it was 20 million. So I'm not sure what's going on. But I went through with my students yesterday in class, and in the psychology class here, and we went through job losses and the stress that's created from that, and how certain jobs, there's this idea of job de-skilling. Your job is no longer needed. A lot of examples are in food. A lot of people are losing their jobs in food, and some places have even shut down, and the students have to get retrained. We know that you have 5 to 7 careers and 20 jobs within your lifetime. One thing that I recommend, and I've talked to millionaires that have worked to rebuild. I love studying what they do, right? Like what you do back then. I was like looking at what they did to rebuild. And one of the things they told me is that one guy told me he got fired unfairly from a job, and he knew that he could do it again. The secret is, no matter whether we have a pandemic, whatever's going on, you can do it again. You can get back. Many years I was in Brazil, there was a book I came across, and it's called Tenta Outra Vez. I was in the airport and I picked up this book. It's in Portuguese, and it's Try Again, Try Another Time. There's another book that I recommend by David Martin. It's called Another Shot. And in that, he tries again and again and again. You just don't give up. You're relentless. There needs to be that obsessive quality, but it's also unhealthy if you're not controlling it, like tempering it. But there's this idea of, I just keep getting back up. I just keep going forward. And in this pandemic, if we know that, you know what, it's going to pass. I can make it through. I'm going to be successful. I have a student right now. She told me one of the things that she does, this is the one I told you about, the paycheck to paycheck. And we're going to talk about ways to build her finances. And I said, have that long-term approach, because you can be wealthy, right? And what happens is that you get to a certain point, if you're doing everything right, the money just will take off and you never even worry about your paychecks. And she says, really, that happens? It can happen if you believe it. And the thing is, now she has this idea of affirming what she wants. She says, I want to be an elementary school teacher. I am an elementary school teacher. She's obsessed. And she knows during this pandemic, she might be living paycheck to paycheck, but we talked about it. I told her during the Zoom session, I said, look, that's temporary. Because you're going to be an elementary school teacher. This is just temporary. You're making it through. She might have to get an extra job to bring an extra income, right? But there's this idea that she can do it. She's focused on the long term. She reminds herself. She's balancing herself mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritual. There is that. I showed a video many years ago, and the Olympic athlete coach he said all the successful Olympic athletes that he's been training, they're obsessed. And I had a conversation with the director earlier this morning. There is this obsession, and you talked about the infectiousness. There has to be this desire that no matter what, I'm committed to my lifelong learning and growth. Because if I know any area of my life that I need to work on, whether we're in a pandemic or not, whatever we're going through here is going to serve me after the pandemic. Right? So and if we don't like Zoom, we better learn to love it. Zoom is here to stay. And by the way, it's a great stock. I'm not trying to say that Hawks is endorsing that, but it's a great way to double your money. So what you also should do is you should also think about student assistance and employee wellness programs. Something happened.
Everything seems to be okay on our end. What did you see?
It's just all white.
Oh, okay. I still see the meeting room active. What was that?
Should I stop sharing and bring it back?
Yes, if you want to do that. I can still see it on my end, but to get it back on your end, yes, that might be the right.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Joanna, I found the best organizations during the pandemic are the Student Assistance Program, Employment Assistance Program. Sometimes they have counselors on site, and I still speak to a stress management expert. He's a police psychologist out of Cincinnati. And what I do is I pay him once a month. And now I'm not in Cincinnati, I'm in Virginia. And he trained the Cincinnati police force for many years and did psychological fitness exams. And I met him at a college, and he was my wellness person there. And I said, "Do you mind if I pay you after and just continue working with you?" And he's been helping me. It's amazing. What I recommend, I don't know that you have to go to a police psychologist, but what I recommend to everybody to prevent the burnout is the counseling. Go to a counselor, try to find anything that's there. I recommend group support. I recommend proper nutrition. Exercise, I go 5 times a week. I love exercising. I also recommend during the pandemic 45 minutes of sunlight. If you notice, I'm sitting in front of a window right here. I have a huge window in my house. I have a wall of windows, and I see a lot of lighting where you are. And 45 minutes helps to offset seasonal affective disorder, which kicks in for many of us in different parts of the world and country. So you have to teach students how to balance, manage stress, time management. We talked about financial examples, and then that one student reaffirming her goal. She knows she's going to be successful. And then you want to pair them with other successful students who are buying and selling apartment complexes. So it's like you want to create that network because they'll say, yes, it is possible because they're doing it. And you want to get those people around the can-do attitude, right? The other thing we talked about is this idea of the restructuring of educational clubs, as we said in the beginning. Creativity is paramount, but it's not enough. You have to be able to use a SWOT analysis constantly, and that's the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And although novelty and unpredictability can be negative in one respect, it can be positive in another respect. For my human services and psychology club, the challenge is the speaker is in Thailand. I just got an email from him earlier today, and we're going to talk about sex trafficking and human trafficking. And I have a lot of students working in crisis centers, human services, right? And we have a topic every month. And can you believe he's going to have the speech? He wants to give his presentation on Thanksgiving. I'm like, nobody's going to attend Thanksgiving. And so my boss here, my director, was kind of giggling, the dean. And I said, so I sent him an email this morning. Can you do another day? I'll make it any other day you want. I'll make it work. But there are those logistical errors. But I told you here in-house, I had the FBI come. They came, and then I had a domestic violence person come. And we're going to have in the human services club, we're going to have the transpersonal psychology, implicit bias in law enforcement individuals. We're going to have somebody on race and ethnicity, and we're going to make it fun and interactive and engaged. I have some motivational coaches. The motivational seminar company, right, that I assisted for many years, I'm going to have the president. He's already said yes. And he said he's going to come in. The nice part of Zoom, as we've talked about, is it allows you to handle the distance barrier. The problem is the logistics around the time and scheduling. It's very challenging, and you have to be really, really skilled in project management. There's a new project management software that I'm checking out. It's called Monday or something, monday.com. I don't know if you've heard of it. I saw some ads for it, but it's a very visual project management type of situation that would be very good for designing club structures or anything from one campus to another. You want to get a very visual approach. And then the other thing is, you also have to understand that each member on the team needs to do their part. So they were kind of surprised here at the college and university that in the restructuring due to the pandemic and the shift in campus culture, that I'm getting these people to speak pro bono. There is no money. They said, well, we do have some money that you could split, but I know there's my counterpart at another campus who also needs that money. So if everybody can do their part, you know what I mean, to kind of chip in and roll up their sleeves. When I do the nonprofit graduate course, when I assist that professor once a year at Louisiana State, I said to the staff, the students, 120, many of them are already professionals. One guy was a president of a college. They run organizations. And I'm telling them, look, you still got to roll up your sleeves. And sometimes you're going to have to take a pay cut. You're going to have to do things for free. You're going to have to do speaking and training for free just to make it work. A lot of people aren't on board with that, but guess what? You sometimes have to just do things for free or volunteer. And those are the people that are less likely to be on the chopping block. If I'm going to add extra value anyway, I just love doing it. I say, yes, the answer is yes. I'll make it work. You got to be careful because you don't want to burn yourself out. But if you're more likely to say yes than no, they're going to remember you at whatever campus or institution. But I can sure as heck tell you if you don't think that you say no, you're territorial, or you don't want to put in the extra time, your days are numbered. If there is a chopping block, guess what? They're going to put you up front. I'm not going to say it depends on the institution, but we always want to go above and beyond. But what I still like here and at other institutions is they're very easygoing, very flexible, and they work with each professor's style. So really quickly, I know we're running out of time, but what you want to do is create that excitement, group counseling. I have crime specialists, hypnotherapists coming, creative art therapists. We're going to have a lot of fun. So the engagement, the energy in those clubs that are going to be virtual, they still need to be there. You can't lose them. And then you just have to figure out and maybe preview the plans. But one of the things that I recommend is I just recommend making shifts with the professors, right? So if the professors are going to, I have one professor I'm working with at another institution, he does not want to use Zoom. He doesn't want to do it. And so they're asking me if I'll take that class, and he's taking online classes. He's a senior member. And then they asked both of us, do you want this online class that's about to start? You know what I said to him? He used to be full-time and he still wants to stay active. Give him the online class. And he really appreciated it. He said, do you want to do coffee sometime? I said, sure. But what he's saying is, thank you. So each professor has to do their part. There's some professors that don't want to do Zoom, and some institutions are saying that's okay. Let's let them go online. And then the ones that are willing to do the Zoom, they have to shift. That means that we have to play musical chairs, and that's something nobody talks about. There needs to be that accommodation, but you want to be that seamless professor. If I'm having you online, hybrid, and I'm having you teach face-to-face, if I'm having you teach 10, 30 subjects, 20 subjects, whatever you need to do, and there's a trademark, but then you're so flexible, you're willing to reinvent yourself. You got to kind of move towards that model if you want, and that will make you employable in almost any environment. The schools that are going to hire you or institutions that are going to hire you are going to hire you. Other ones that are not going to hire you, if you're not a good fit, you're not a good fit. Don't try to sell yourself on them. You want to be the best that you can be and attract the right fit. The same way that a student is looking for the school during the pandemic, they're very cautious now, especially, and with the flexibility, the transfer credits, and like, oh my goodness, this pandemic is shaking up everything. There needs to be that flexibility. What's your take on that, Joanna?
Yeah, I think right now, especially that need for flexibility and being able to accommodate others, and like you said, being a little selfless is more important than ever. It's really in order to eliminate some of your own personal stressors. Sometimes you really have to just, give some of that up and really focus on making it work. And, we're all, a word that came to mind when you were speaking earlier was resilience, and that we all just have to work together to get through this and keep our goals in mind and, keep pushing forward without getting caught up in, the mental health areas where it can be really difficult to keep moving through. So I do definitely feel that, that being flexible and, making quick changes to plans or, helping out a professor here and there is just, like we said, that community aspect is so important right now. I do know that we have about 2 minutes left or so I do want to let you wrap up, and we just have a question or two at the end for you. So I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll just have a question or two once you are finished.
Perfect. Okay, so which learning management systems do most professors use? It depends. Blackboard, Canvas. Canvas is very nice because of the multi-technology integration. A lot of people like Blackboard. A lot of e-resources are very helpful. And we have Camtasia Relay, which is worth checking out. QuickTime Player we talked about. There's VoiceThread, which is similar with the audio. And I encourage you to check out all of these things. YouTube, a lot of people are getting a lot of TED Talks and integrating them into the announcements. And then we have the benefits of Zoom, as we talked about. There is this idea of technical aspects and getting all professors on board, students on board, and keeping them engaged. So I absolutely want, one last thing I want to say is what I like what they're doing here at Southside. I've seen it at UMA, other campuses, many other schools I've worked at, is they're very team oriented. Like you said, they're getting, my supervisors, I'm so blessed because I'm lucky because they motivate us, they encourage us, they reward each one of us individually. I've done a lot of MBA trainings and corporate trainings, and one of the things that we find is everybody needs to be rewarded, and they give you such individualized attention here, and they always let you be successful and they give you the room to be creative. And I think during the pandemic, if the institutions allow the professors to be having that degree of control and flexibility and occasionally checking in, and then allowing the students to do the same thing, there's this synergistic effect that pulls us through, like you're saying. I want to thank you for this presentation. I really had a lot of fun doing it.
Excellent. It was wonderful working with you as well. I did, just before we wrap up, have a couple quick questions for you. One of them is, how do you stay or how do you handle students who may be resistant to your attempts at engagement? Do you find that you still have students that you aren't able to reach, and how do you kind of handle that more from a personal standpoint, since you are clearly very motivated and engaging and, definitely determined to get all those students, really reach out to all those students? Do you ever find that you have students that you just aren't able to reach, and how do you handle that?
Yes, and is this a question in general or from a professor that's coming?
This was a general question.
A general question. Perfect. So what I've noticed, Joanna and Kate, what I've noticed is if you get weeded out early, and I know that's hard to believe, but I had an experience many years ago at a college. I still remember the student. She was an art student, and everybody in the class loved the class. They said it was high energy and loved it. But it turns out we had these course evaluations, and she put her name, and she didn't like the class. And I was horrified because I didn't. And the reason she didn't like the class, I found out, was because she's low energy and she doesn't like the high energy. And so she sat through the class, did not participate in any discussions. So what I did is I changed my style because she stayed in the class to adapt. And everybody still loved the class, but I wanted to connect with her and let her know, just like I told you with that other case, I immediately took the feedback, right? And I tried to tailor it to the way that he wanted. And apparently it didn't work for her, but it did. She softened up towards the end of the class, and it was a 30-day class. But I learned from that experience, no matter how good you think you are, no matter how skilled you think you are as a professor or even as a student in a particular class, there needs to be that degree of openness. Am I willing to be open to the person's style? Am I willing to learn from that professor? And so I run into that once in a while. If the person doesn't like my style, it'll usually be decided in that first weekend. It usually won't be anything personal. They might have a preference. So that means that if anybody stays in the class, and it's very rare, Joanna, it's hardly ever, but when it is there, it gets weeded out early because the person's already making their choice in the drop period or drop ad period. I've talked to other mentors and directors, and they said it's totally normal. I take it personally because I have this idea that everybody has to love me, everybody has to put up with me and stay in my classes. But that's idealistic, right? So what you want to do is, there is this idea that the syllabus is a contract, right? If you're enrolled in my class, you're staying in my class, then let me help you to succeed. And we get the advisors involved, get the parents involved, we create a success plan. Later on today, here at the school, we're meeting with an advisor. I'm sitting down with the student. We're going over courses for the spring. She has some technical stuff that we have to get ironed out with one of the advisors here. And I'm also an advisor. And we're going to help that student to succeed. But there has to be that willingness, Joanna, right? You can take a horse to water, but you can't force that horse to drink. If you're open to staying in my class, if you're crazy enough to do it, then you're going to go along for the ride and we're going to have a great time. And that's why the correct environment, the idea of I feel comfortable as a professor, I love teaching in these various environments, especially here, and I feel supported, so that allows me to do my best work. And so if I can do my best work, the students feel that, they're more likely to open up to me. I hope that answers your question, but they are going to self-select themselves out. I've interviewed many professors on this, and there is this idea of a correction period in the beginning. It's nothing personal, but it can be horrifying when you have somebody that doesn't like the class and you think you're doing everything right. It's like I'm finding out 3 weeks later in a 4-week class, and you have to be open to that feedback, to corrective action. But then once they stay in the class, you got to run with it. You got to do whatever you can to help them be successful.
Perfect.
And the at-risk calls, documenting the at-risk calls, letting everybody know. And just doing everything you can so that you're crossing all your T's and you're dotting all your I's, but you're doing it from a genuine place. What's your take on it?
I think that was a great answer. Thank you so much for addressing really all sides of that. I do think what you said, being open to that feedback on either side, even if you are really engaged and you are creative and you are altering your approach, ultimately there are going to be a few students who that isn't their style. Like you said, it just isn't their preference. So being, learning to not take that to heart and accepting that students, some do have different preferences, but my suspicion is that, like you said, you have very few of those students because you definitely seem to keep your students quite engaged. So.
Thank you. But when I do have it happen, I cry, I curl up on my couch. I'm eating bonbons because I'm like, what the heck happened?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Professor Paul, for your time today. And thank you to all of our attendees. We are unfortunately out of time, but if there are any questions about logistics or anything further with this webinar, please direct them to marketing@hawkslearning.com. And we will be emailing you a link to view this webinar on demand once it has been processed, as I mentioned. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you again.